Today we're going to be looking at how we can lower our environmental footprint by looking at bottled water versus tap water. But just before we begin, I want you to have a think about how many of you have ever gone to a supermarket and purchased a bottle of water? How many times do you do that a week? Do you do that quite often? Believe it or not, we sell 600 million bottles a year of bottled water in Australia. How does that affect us? It actually affects our natural resources such as water, coal, gas and oil because they're required to produce water bottles and to transport them. We make the plastic out of the oil, fuel is used when we're transporting them in the trucks and we're exporting and using big ships, and the actual bottles are made of biodegradables, plastics, so they're not actually broken down into the earth. They break into smaller pieces, they travel long distances and they float into the air and water and they end up in the ocean. By ending up in the ocean, they're killing marine life because some of the fish are eating them, mistaking them for food, and they're ending up in landfill. This is a startling figure. 80% of bottles are ending up in landfill and only 20% of bottles are being recycled. Have a think about this. If you recycle one extra bottle, you can power a computer for 20 minutes. More than 1 million seabirds and 100,000 mammals are dying every year. And pollution is affecting 100 million people a year. Have a think about those statistics. We're going to come back to that. Can you all go get your calculators? We're going to type in 600 million on our calculator. So it's 600, excuse me, with an extra 6 zeros. And we're going to work out our recycling rate in Australia. So 600 million times 20%, that's what we're recycling, 120 million bottles. 480 million bottles are ending up in landfill. So that's the 600 million minus the 120. Let's just have a think. Let's increase our recycling rate just by 10%. It's an extra 1 out of 10. It's an extra 10 out of 100. What happens? If we increase our recycling rate from 20 to 30%, 180 million bottles will be recycled, an extra 60 million. Let's have a think about what else gets affected if we recycle by an extra 10%. Oil. We consume 460,000 barrels of oil just to make that water. We can reduce that by 10%. Look at the figures. Seabirds that are dying. Instead of 1 million dying a year, it will reduce down to 900,000. Mammals dying, instead of 100,000, be 90,000. Pollution, it affects 100 million people worldwide. By recycling that extra 10%, it could possibly affect less people, affect 90 million. So we've been discussing percentages today. We've been discussing how many percentage, well 20% compared to 30%. And we all know that a percentage is an amount out of 100. So it's 10% is 10 out of 100 or 10 100ths or 0.10. We're also going to be discussing today equivalent fractions, percentages and decimals. So we know how to calculate our percentages. I'm going to show you today how percentages equal equivalent fractions and decimals. So let's have a look at the first scenario. Back to simple recycling facts. Let's say we have 100 bottles that we're discussing. We want to recycle 10 out of the 100 bottles. This grid here is 10 bottles. You highlight 10 of the bottles, that gives you 10%, but it also gives you 10 100ths. So 10 100ths equals 10%. We can also show percentage as a decimal. So let's write 10%. It's 10 out of 100. So there's 1/10 and 0 hundredths, and we write it as 0.10. So recycling an extra 10 out of 100 bottles is the same as recycling 0.10 of 100 bottles, or it's the same as recycling 10 100ths of bottles. Now, let's have a look at different strategies and ideas and what we can come up with. So firstly, let's work in pairs. So if you want to work with the person next to you, we're going to be thinking about the first one altogether. So if there's 100 children in our school and all the children recycle 10% of the bottles, how many are they going to recycle? 10 out of 100? 10%. If there are 100 children in the school and they recycle 1/10 of the bottles, how many would they be recycling? Well, 1/10 equals 10 100ths. That equals 10%. Same amount, 10. 100 children in the school and they recycle 0.10 of their bottles. Again, 10 100ths, so it's 10%. So as you can see, there's 3 different ways of showing 10%. There's this table that's actually quite handy. It shows you the most common fraction, decimals and percentages. It shows you that, say, 1/20th equals 0.05 equals 5%. These are numbers that are quite handy if you learn them and you memorize them, because when you're trying to work out something and you're saying, what's a quarter of 100? Well, a quarter of 100 is 25%, equals 0.25. It's something that will help you in the future. Now, we can use this table when we're doing the next graph, but I actually prefer you to show your workings out. So let's look at this graph. We've got 100 students and I'm giving you some examples of what the percentage is, the fraction and the decimal, and I want you to go back and have a think about how you can do this on your own. I need to be able to see how you're working this out, so please do not use your calculators for this one. You can draw pictures, you can do equations, you can talk about it together, or you can use the blocks. It's up to you how you do it. So I want you to have a look at 100 students. 10% gives you 10. What is 1/10 of 100? Is 10. And what is 0.10? It's 10 again. So I want you to have a look at this whole graph and complete it all. You can work together, that's not a problem. And then I want you to come back to me and let's talk about if there is a pattern. And then we can work out what kind of a pattern there is. After we do that, we're going to be doing something a little bit more interesting. We're going to be looking at a larger problem about recycling. And this is a situation. You'll be given this worksheet, 720 students at school. They've all got a different recycling rate, depending on how many children are in each class. And so what I want you to do is I want you to display this information for me. You can do this in charts, in tables, in graphs, in pictures, any way you like. You need to show me these statistics. So you've got 120 students in prep. They're recycling this amount of water. Then what I want you to do is show me if we increase recycling by 10%, how many more bottles will they recycle? And go through the questions. Once you've finished all this, and if you've got more time, you can come up with your own examples and you can provide some questions to the class, such as, if they recycle by an extra 50%, what will the answer be? So let's have a bit of fun with this and enjoy percentages, fractions and decimals.